Just ing. A former insider has reportedly broken years of silence reviving disturbing allegations surrounding Erika Kirk's Romanian Orphanage, a chapter of her past that many claim was never meant to be revisited. Social media is buzzing with claims that key records disappeared. Witnesses stayed quiet, and questions about missing children were never fully answered. And now, according to these reports, someone who says they was there is finally speaking out. Before we go any further, it's important to be clear. What you're about to hear involves allegations and claims, not proven facts. No charges have been confirmed, and nothing discussed here should be taken as a conviction. But the questions being raised are serious and they're not going away. If you value careful analysis over rumors, take a second to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future updates. And as always, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment with your thoughts on these allegations and tell me where you're watching from. Now let's break down why this story matters and why this silence, according to critics, may be more telling than any statement ever could be. To understand why these claims are gaining traction now, you first have to understand who Erika Kirk is and why her Romanian orphanage has remained one of the most sensitive and least discussed chapters of her past. For years, Erika has been publicly associated with philanthropy, advocacy, and carefully curated causes centered around children and humanitarian work. Central to that image was an orphanage project in Romania, often described as a charitable effort meant to help vulnerable children in the aftermath of widespread poverty and institutional collapse. But according to critics, this orphanage, commonly referred to as Romanian Angels, has always existed behind a wall of silence. Whenever questions surfaced about how it operated, who funded it, or what ultimately happened to the children who passed through it, the conversation ended abruptly. Records were scarce, former staff were nowhere to be found, and official documentation, according to those who have searched for it, was either incomplete or entirely missing. What makes this significant is not just the absence of information, but the consistency of that absence. In true crime analysis, silence over time can raise as many questions as direct accusations, especially when an organization is said to have employed dozens of people and operated across international borders. This orphanage matters because it sits at the center of every major allegation, now resurfacing. It's the one place where timelines blur, paperwork disappears, and first-hand witnesses until now have reportedly refused to speak publicly. And according to observers, that's exactly why this moment feels different. Because for the first time, someone claiming insider knowledge says they're ready to describe what they believe really happened behind closed doors. According to recent reports circulating online, a former insider connected to Erika Kirk's Romanian Orphanage has now come forward choosing to speak anonymously about what they claim to have witnessed during their time there. This individual has not attached their name to their statements, and that detail matters. In true crime analysis, anonymity can weaken verification, but it can also signal fear of retaliation, legal exposure, or personal risk. And according to this source, those fears are precisely why they stayed silent for so long. The insider alleges that the orphanage did not operate the way it was publicly presented. They claim that internal records were deliberately restricted. That documentation regarding children's placements was inconsistently maintained, and that staff were discouraged from asking questions about missing or incomplete files. One of the most serious claims involves documents the insider says were intentionally destroyed. According to their account, these were not routine administrative papers, but records they believe could have connected decision-making at the orphanage directly back to Erika herself. The insider alleges that staff were instructed to burn or otherwise dispose of these documents under pressure, creating what they describe as a deliberate effort to erase a paper trail. It's important to be absolutely clear here. These are allegations, not established facts. No independent verification has yet confirmed that documents were destroyed, nor has any authority publicly validated these claims. But the reason this testimony has drawn attention is not just what is being alleged, it's how closely it mirrors long-standing questions that were never resolved. According to the insider, the atmosphere inside the orphanage was one of compliance, not transparency. They claim that questioning procedures, transfers, or funding sources was subtly but firmly discouraged. And over time, they say, that culture of silence became normalized. Critics argue that if even part of this account is accurate, it could explain why so little documentation remains and why so many questions about the orphanage's operations were left unanswered for years. As these insider allegations began circulating, independent observers and critics started revisiting what little public information exists about Erika Kirk's Romanian Orphanage, and what they found raised even more questions. One of the most striking issues is the lack of consistent documentation. For an organization that allegedly operated for years, handled international child placements, and relied on donations and external partnerships, there appears to be an unusual absence of publicly accessible records. Financial filings, transfer logs, and staff rosters are either incomplete or, according to some researchers, entirely missing. Then there are the contradictions. Public statements made over the years about the scope of the orphanages. Work don't always align with the limited records that can be located. Timelines shift. Numbers change. And descriptions of how children were placed or reunited with families remain vague. Critics argue that these inconsistencies may explain why the same questions keep resurfacing without resolution. Adding to the concern is the repeated emphasis on silence. Not a single former administrator, caretaker, or volunteer has publicly stepped forward to offer a detailed account that definitively clarifies what happened inside the orphanage. In true crime analysis, that kind of uniform quiet, especially over an extended period, often becomes part of the story itself. There are also claims that attempts to retrieve information were met with deflection. According to commentators, inquiries were redirected, records were said to be lost, or responsibility was shifted elsewhere. And while none of this proves wrongdoing, it does create a pattern of unanswered questions that continues to fuel speculation. Taken together, these gaps confirm the insider's allegations, but those claims found audently. When documentation is missing and explanations are inconsistent, even unverified testimony can feel amplified. And that amplification is what pushes this story forward into its next phase. At this point, analysts and observers stress the importance of slowing down and looking at patterns, not to assign guilt, but to understand why concerns keep resurfacing around the same issues. In true crime analysis, patterns matter because they help distinguish between isolated administrative failures and systemic problems. Critics point out that the same themes appear repeatedly whenever the orphanage is discussed: missing paperwork, vague explanations, shifting timelines, and a persistent absence of first-hand accounts from those who worked inside the organization. On their own, any one of these could be explained away. Together, they form a recurring narrative that some say is difficult to ignore. Another pattern frequently mentioned is control of information. According to commentators, details about the orphanage were often shared selectively, with public-facing narratives emphasizing charitable intent, while operational specifics remained unclear. When questions arose, the focus reportedly shifted away from documentation and toward intent why the work was done, rather than how it was done. Analysts also note the timing of when allegations resurface. Periods of renewed public attention often coincide with moments when Erika Kirk's public profile changes or when older chapters of her life come back into focus. This has led some to argue that unresolved questions were never answered, only postponed. To be clear, patterns are not proof. They do not establish criminal behavior or intent. But they do explain why new allegations, even when unverified, can feel credible to an audience already aware of long-standing inconsistencies. Patterns create context, and context shapes how new claims are received. And it's within that context that critics begin asking a broader question, not about what happened once, but about whether the same concerns have followed this story for years without meaningful resolution. As the conversation around the orphanage deepens, attention inevitably shifts to questions of power, access, and oversight, not as proof of wrongdoing, but as context for how certain organizations can operate with limited scrutiny. Observers note that Erika Kirk did not emerge from obscurity long before the orphanage became part of her public story. She moved within circles that provided access to resources, donors, and influential networks. In true crime analysis, that kind of access matters because it can shape how projects are funded, how oversight is applied, and how problems are addressed or avoided. Critics argue that international charities, especially those operating across borders, often exist in regulatory gray areas. Oversight can be fragmented between governments, agencies, and nonprofit structures, making accountability difficult even under the best circumstances. When combined with strong personal branding and influential connections, some say that scrutiny can weaken even further. It's also been pointed out that the orphanage operated in a post-communist environment, where child welfare systems were already strained and documentation standards varied widely. That reality complicates the picture. Missing records could stem from systemic failures rather than intentional acts, yet it also creates conditions where misconduct, if it occurred, would be harder to detect. Importantly, none of this proves that influence was used improperly. But it does explain why critics believe the orphanage avoided deeper examination for so long. Power and access don't automatically imply abuse, but they can limit transparency, especially when no independent audit or third-party investigation is publicly available. And that lack of clear oversight is why analysts stress the need to separate relevance from accusation. Background and proximity to influence don't establish guilt. They simply help explain how unanswered questions might persist without resolution. Any responsible true crime analysis must also examine the other. Cite what could challenge or outright disprove the allegations now circulating about Erika Kirk's Romanian Orphanage. First, it's important to acknowledge that allegations alone, especially from anonymous sources, are not evidence. Without named witnesses, verified documents, or official findings, these claims remain unproven. Administrative failures, poor record keeping, or the passage of time could explain at least some of the missing documentation critics point to. Another counterpoint is the absence of formal charges or public legal action related to the orphanage. To date, no court has ruled that crimes were committed, and no confirmed government statements have been released validating claims of document destruction or misconduct. That silence could indicate ongoing reviews, or it could simply mean there was nothing actionable to pursue. Analysts also note that international orphanages operating during periods of instability often struggled with inconsistent standards. In that context, gaps in paperwork may reflect systemic dysfunction rather than intentional wrongdoing. Without comparative data from similar organizations operating at the same time, it's difficult to determine whether this case is truly an outlier. So what would actually disprove these claims? Clear. Independently verified records showing lawful child placements. Named former staff publicly contradicting the insider's account. Third-party audits, government documentation, or court filings that directly address the allegations. Any of these could significantly alter how this story is understood. Until such evidence surfaces, the responsible position is neither belief nor dismissal but scrutiny. Because true crime analysis is not about choosing sides. It's about weighing what is claimed against what can be proven, and recognizing the difference between unanswered questions and established facts. What's intensified interest in these allegations is not just their content, but their timing. According to observers, the claims surrounding Erika Kirk's Romanian Orphanage are resurfacing at a moment when her public narrative appears to be shifting once again. Recent developments, whether renewed public visibility, new projects, or fresh media attention, have prompted critics to re-examine unresolved chapters from her past. In true crime analysis, timing often plays a crucial role. Allegations that linger for years without traction can suddenly gain momentum when circumstances change and public scrutiny increases. Some commentators believe the emergence of an insider now is not a coincidence. They argue that people are more willing to speak when they sense that others are paying attention, or when they believe their testimony will no longer be dismissed outright. Others suggest the opposite, that renewed allegations could be a reaction to visibility itself, rather than new information. There have also been unconfirmed reports and online speculation suggesting that outside authorities may be reviewing historical activities connected to the orphanage. At this time, no official confirmation has been released, and these reports remain unverified. Still, the mere suggestion of institutional review has been enough to raise the temperature of the conversation. What's clear is that this moment feels different to many observers. Not because new facts have been proven, but because old questions are being asked louder, more persistently, and by a wider audience than ever before. And once that happens, silence, whether intentional or not, becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. As this story continues to circulate, one thing remains clear: no court has issued a ruling. No official findings have been confirmed, and no allegation discussed here has been proven as fact. Allegations are not convictions, and speculation is not evidence. But unanswered questions still linger. If the orphanage operated transparently, where are the records that could put these concerns to rest? If former staff witnessed nothing out of the ordinary, why has no one publicly stepped forward to say so? And if the insider's claims are false, what documentation exists to definitively disprove them? True crime analysis isn't about deciding guilt, it's about understanding why certain stories refuse to disappear. It's about recognizing when silence, missing information, and unresolved contradictions create space for doubt. And it's about asking whether the truth, whatever it may be, has ever been fully examined. For now, the allegations surrounding Erika Kirk's Romanian orphanage remain exactly that, allegations. What happens next will depend on evidence, transparency, and whether those with first-hand knowledge are willing to step into the light. Until then, the questions remain. And in cases like this, the questions often matter just as much as the answers. I'm Detective B. If you're fascinated by real life, mysteries, and criminal investigations, tap like, subscribe, and share your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you think about today's case. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, in true crime, the line between fact and perception is often thinner than we realize.